Ray Parker Jr. has Detroit in his blood. He grew up in Virginia Park in Michigan, a neighborhood where the median household income hovers around $20,000. Where Niche.com gives the neighborhood nightlife an A, but a D- for housing. It's dense, it's smoky, and it's urban. In Ray's childhood, it was just 12 blocks from the Motown studios, where the best musicians in the world were penning American culture into existence. Despite being super talented and extra disciplined as a musician, Ray became what the music industry refers to as a session musician. A hired instrument who arrives early to the studio, plays for the real artist, and collects a check. Session musicians like Ray are sometimes called sidemen or hired guns, which is the title of an Amazon documentary about these 20 feet from fame backup players. During his career, Ray was the best. He wrote songs that won Grammys. He played guitar for Stevie Wonder. He went on the road with the Rolling Stones as a guitarist for the opening act. He wrote or did session work for Bill Cosby, Chaka Khan, The Supremes, and Aretha Franklin. Ray also got sued by Huey Lewis, who thought Ray had cribbed his rhythm. Ray's name was left off the albums he wrote to leave room for the real stars. And that Grammy-winning hit I mentioned, Ray might have written it, but the record company gave it to another artist to perform, and they struck Ray's name from the credits because Ray was just a session musician, a hired gun with delusions of grandeur. But here's something you might already know if you've been nursing your own pet delusion. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't quit. Delusions of grandeur are only delusions until they get that big hit, that one-hit wonder, something Ray was due for because Ray Parker Jr. knew how to put in the work. Hard, unrelenting work ethic. That's what pushes delusions of grandeur past delusional to just plain grandeur. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet and get to the facts.
In the movie The Matrix, the sage mentor character Morpheus tells our plucky hero Neo that he can leap from a skyscraper to skyscraper, like Superman, if he only frees his mind.
Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.
Suffering delusions of grandeur can feel the same. We set out to do something huge, something bold and wonderful and daring that will hopefully make us a fortune. Then, halfway through taking our leap, we realize we can't make it. We never had a chance. Anyone watching from the outside would have told us we never had it in us. Today we want to ask, is it better to take the leap knowing we probably won't make it? That we might become a smear on the streets? Or would our time, our effort, and our bank account be better served if we played it safe and realistic? Why try to leap across buildings if we can all work comfortably as clerks and administrative assistants? Or in the case of Ray Parker Jr., why try to become a world-famous musician if you can make perfectly good money playing backup guitar for real stars? Or even safer, if we never bought that expensive guitars and studio time in the first place? So to help us decide between playing it safe or pursuing our delusional passions, we have 3 myths to bust. Myths like: Myth 1. Anyone who accuses us of having delusions of grandeur is just suffering from a crippling case of jealousy. I couldn't possibly have delusions of grandeur, could I? Myth 2. Okay, let's assume we're not delusional. We actually are super special, super smart, or super talented. How do we know if we're going to make it? And how much time and money should we risk? Myth 3. What if we were fully committed to the delusion? What if we're all in like Ray Parker? How do we proceed, knowing we're destined for awesomeness? Where do we go to pick up our crowns and tiaras? But first, I want to tell Joe about what kind of neighborhood Ray Parker grew up in and why aiming for world-famous musician was far from being the safe choice.
Okay, so to start us off, Todd, I would like to ask you a personal question if you don't mind.
Oh, please. I'm an open book.
Most of our episodes come from personal places. We pick things out that we actually want to know, or things that we are struggling with in any given week. So do you mind sharing how we ended up landing on Delusions of Grandeur?
Well, this always bothers me. There's always that quote that says, your dreams should be so big they should scare you. And I agree with that advice, and I think people's ceilings are different. Some people's ceilings are higher depending on what field they're in. But I want to know how realistic my own dreams were. Was I just being delusional about the success of the show or success of my public speaking career? Was it realistic? Is it obtainable? Is it worth my time?
Okay. Another version of that quote that we're going to talk about today is dream so big that it makes you go broke. So we'll...
Where do you go all in? But what if you don't have as many chips as maybe a more affluent family?
Right. So we've covered in past episodes Smithsonian articles that talk about how you are more likely to be an artist or in a creative field if you come from a wealthier family, because you can push all your chips in and not feel so bad if your delusions of grandeur don't work out.
Now, what's funny is I came up with this subject, but Joe came up with the Ray Parker Jr. Now, I'm one of the few people in the world who love Ray Parker Jr., but hate the song Ghostbusters.
Oh,
I like
really?
his other songs.
So you're a fan of his old albums then?
Yes. His real music, not his movie music.
Okay. Yeah, I grew up with Ghostbusters. Like it came out like a couple of years after I was born or around the same time. So all I knew of Ray Parker Jr. was Ghostbusters. When I saw that he had done all this amazing stuff, it was just, I was like, what? The Ghostbusters guy?
Now, something I liked about the Ray Parker Jr., just his personality in general, besides his music, is when he tells a story, he's kind of a tell it like it is now. Like it is, but not... We always hear in these... What do you always hear in these story arcs for these bands? They had nothing, and they overcame everything, right?
Sleeping on basement floors, playing bar mitzvahs. Yeah.
These hell and back story arcs. But he doesn't do that. He talks about how successful he was before he became famous.
Okay.
Now, one real big part of his life, he was in high school. He grew up in Detroit. And there that he lived in was always a tough area. It was a lot of crime. He talks about, and this had a big impact on his life, was one day as a high schooler, he was going to the bus stop from his house, and he was stopped and beaten up by the police. He was singled out. He had a gun pulled on him. He wasn't told what he did wrong, and he was beaten and frightened by the police officers.
How old was he?
He was 16, 17. He was still in high school. He was a kiddo.
A band geek high schooler who was just, I mean, like, as we said in the narrative, he lived like less than a mile from Motown. So, like, I can't imagine a scarier thing if you are a creative soul like that. Like, if all you want to do is lament things into a microphone and play your guitar, and then you're just getting the crap kicked out of you.
Yeah, let's face it, when you're practicing guitar 10 hours a day, you don't have time to get in much trouble.
Right, exactly.
I think that's funny. You don't think of rock stars as they used to be band geeks, right? It's true.
Most of the successful people I've met, they're either geeks or they are used to sports. Like Angela Duckworth in Grit talks about it. Like you have a mindset of practice, and it really seems like Ray Parker did.
Now, Ray Parker Jr., when he became a session musician and got really good at his trade, became a master, he worked with some amazing bands. I said Bill Cosby, the Carpenters, Screams, the Temptations, Gladys Knight, Tina Turner, Diana Ross. But his favorite, the master he learned the most from, that he's proudest of, that he still thinks about every day, was he learned how to write songs with the Stevie Wonder.
That is awesome.
He even says, this is his quote, "I dropped out of school at Lawrence Tech but I graduated from Wonder University, Stevie Wonder University. Isn't that heartwarming?
That is cool. I honestly, okay, so if you could choose between like a college degree from like a trade school and having worked with your hero, which one do you go with?
Oh, the latter.
Right.
Every single time.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever a question in anyone's mind.
Who would you work with if you had your writing mentor? If you could go back, change time, and make it work?
Oh, geez. There's a pile of authors I think I would work with. Most of them are like, I'm going to have to go with Gene Wolfe. Fairly obscure sci-fi author, but the guy was just a genius madman writer.
I like the madman part. I like the idea of him drinking and throwing bottles at you, or you fetch paper for his typewriter.
Yeah, I think that comes with the writer part. If I named any writer, it ends with like a scotch bottle exploding near my head while I bend over to clean up the trash. So who's your choice? Who do you? What hero do you work with if you have a choice?
You know, on the public speaking front, you know, I'd like to work with Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, that is a good choice.
And I'd do whatever. I don't think I'd be smart enough to be one of his researchers or writers. I think I might be able to help with some of his speech, his acting, maybe.
Yeah, we would just be adjusting his microphone,
making sure that he's got a new fresh latte,
right,
shining his shoes. But I'd carry his luggage. I'd hang around with that guy.
Yeah.
If I could be 10% as good as him, that would consider myself that'd be my ceiling.
That is a good pick.
I see him as the GOAT in our business.
Okay, I'm changing my answer to your answer, if you don't mind. So, after Ray worked with his hero, where was he next? Did he take that quote unquote graduation and move on?
Well, he physically lived in Detroit. He grew up in Detroit, blocks from Motown, which is a good timing thing, right? Which is probably part of the reason he's as successful as he has. He has a love for the city, and he just feels like the city's been neglected, and not by the people, just by the people that live there, but by the government and by the world. He sees these other cities who have had tragedies like New Orleans, and they've come and fixed. He says, but for some reason, Detroit and its elected officials have just led to get shittier and shittier through the years, and it really breaks his heart because he's a Detroit guy through and through.
I can see that, and I kind of respect the hell out of it. And he's right. We get most other cities rebuilt.
Well, and Detroit has a history of what? Of the car manufacturers, of being a real blue-collar heartbeat of his country. So you think it would get a little bit more attention because of all the great things it's done, all the jobs and that it's done for this country.
Right. So it is kind of important to our narrative that he stayed in Detroit. Not necessarily that it was a good or bad thing, but the fact that most people have this assumption that to achieve greatness, you have to leave your little hometown. I mean, he was in Detroit, so it's not his little hometown, but we have this sort of idea in our head that we're going to like move to Hollywood and make this big change in our life, and that will spark us achieving greatness. And then we end up serving lattes or being a waiter at, somewhere where we'll have contact with script writers, and we're, talking about how we're going to make it big now that we're in a new place. When we talk about delusions of grandeur, what do you think about when we say that word? Like, what does your mind associate with that?
The big one being is being your best self and having some kind of fame, of some special talent that brings you a lot of attention and brings you a lot of time off and makes your life so you get to see things that you'd never see in your normal life.
Okay, you said a word there that we are really going to focus a lot on, fame and talent. We're going to focus on the fame part for a second, and then later on in the third part of our episode, we're going to talk about talent specifically and how that fits with delusions of grandeur. Because you can have delusions of grandeur with or without talent. That is a very important thing to talk about, because most people, I think, assume delusions of grandeur are strictly delusional, that you don't have any talent, you just think you're going to be big. you're gonna grow up and leave your hometown and strike it out and make it huge, but you don't actually have a plan and you haven't actually put in work and developed a talent.
But you have had some success in that field. That's where that started to be born and birthed. And
right. So then there's the counter thought that, you it's not a delusion, that even if you have a tiny bit of talent, you should nurse it and you should give it the opportunity to grow, and you should, put it out in the sun. So there's a lot of counter advice. I watch these motivational videos on YouTube, like Denzel Washington talking about falling forward, and Arnold Schwarzenegger giving talks about how you should, move to another country and dream big and work hard and don't sleep. Like, he talks about sleeping only 5 hours a day or something and working construction while he lifts weights all day. So we really want to try to find where is the borderline between delusion and where is the borderline between hopeful, we'll call it like reaching or climbing. Where is it delusion, like clear delusion, and where is it something when we are trying to pull a Ray Parker, where we're nowhere near the finish line, we're nowhere near greatness, but we can just keep stretching and keep working and keep stretching. So first off, we're going to start this episode, like when we're about to get into the psychology and how psychologists identify delusions of grandeur and what comorbidities that comes with. And so we get into the part of the episode where Todd and I say, unequivocally, we are not psychologists.
Street psychologist.
Yeah.
It's an honorary title.
Right. I don't know why. I like to believe that street psychologist is like a gang of psychologists, like all these shrinks. Like you've got
West Side Story.
Yeah, Freud sitting in a bar running a gang of 14 psychologists. No, we are not board certified. We are not psychologists. We're not psychiatrists. We're not counselors.
But we do have a lot of mentally ill people we hang around with, including our family members.
That is true. We have personally seen Delusions of Grandeur up close. So we are going to link our sources, and we are just going to be aggregating to you the Wikipedias and the links and the actual like diagnostic criteria. That way you can listen to this episode and, like me, assume if you're a hypochondriac that you have this. No, I'm kidding. That you can listen to this and realize, maybe you need to go in and talk about a diagnosis with a professional, or maybe you can sort of rest assured that you don't fit any of these criteria by far, and that you're better off putting in the practice and pulling a Ray Parker and getting big. So, first off, a delusion of grandeur. And this is from Good Therapy, so it's a good source. We'll drop the links into our episode notes. A delusion of grandeur is the false belief in one's superiority. False belief. That's a big part of this. We're going to repeat that phrase over and over. The false belief of one's superiority, greatness, or intelligence. Now, people that have actual delusions of grandeur, they believe in their own importance. And they believe in it even against evidence to the contrary. So if you and I are delusional, we wouldn't be standing in a studio, or we wouldn't be talking into microphones. We wouldn't be putting in practice. We would just simply believe that we are really awesome. And we could be shown evidence to the contrary. Like people could show us our bad grades, or people could show us our horrible internet scores, or people could show us really just any physical evidence that we haven't achieved anything, and we would still persist, basically. Have you ever believed something about yourself that was like patently false, something that like somebody could show you a physical piece of evidence for?
I did. During my boxing days, I was told this, but I tend to believe that I was at a lot higher level than I was, even though I'd just been violently concussed 2 times in a row.
Okay.
which should have been which it's a pretty strong sign. It's literally a punch in the face.
Right. Having your bell rung is a piece of empirical evidence, one could argue.
How about you? Have you ever had?
Oh God, yes. I think the early part of writing, when I first got started, I thought I was amazing, and I started submitting work out, and everybody who to people, not to publications, I was just throwing my very, very early attempts to write at people, and I was like, yeah, I bet you can't believe how great this story is. And then they'd come back and be like, I can't read this. This is unintelligible. So I got cold water splashed in my face very early.
I've had that happen with speech contests, that
Yeah.
I lost last place and still thought that my speech was the best one. Not only did I think it was the best one, I thought it would win at the next round. I swear. This wasn't that
Come
long
in
ago,
last
by the way.
place, and then think that like, okay, but this next turn, this next time around. So that I think that a little bit of delusion of grandeur may come with the creative process. I don't think it's always bad. But if you can't take that criticism, if you cannot look at evidence and at least change your work ethic and alter your behavior, that's when it gets a little bit dangerous. We have a couple of examples here I want to share with you. Some of the delusions of grandeur, they say specifically in this article, they are not just moments of fantasy or hopes for the future. So what we're describing actually kind of falls under hope for the future or fantasy. We both had brief delusions of grandeur, but we moved it. We stepped it up to, this is a hope for the future. This is a fantasy we're nursing. When we talk true delusion of grandeur, to where it is like, it comes with a diagnosis on the side. By the way, delusion of grandeur is not a disorder. They usually come with a disorder. So it's a symptom of another disorder. Examples of, what would be a gross delusion of grandeur, to where you may actually have something underlying that is feeding this. One would be like a belief that you have a special relationship with a supernatural entity, like cult leaders. Cult leaders think they can communicate with God, or that they themselves are a god. That is just a atypical, very obvious delusion of grandeur. Unless you are actually God and you can perform miracles, then please don't smite us. Another delusion of grandeur is the belief that you might have a special relationship with a famous person or an authority figure, like a president. I have a funny story about this.
Oh boy.
My boss at work has it's like her daughter or granddaughter who has been communicating on an online dating service, and she thinks that for about a year she has been talking with like the lead guitarist of a band, like a huge band. Like, I don't remember which one, but it was like comically large. Like it was like the Rolling Stones or something like that. That could be a sign of a delusion of grandeur. Or the last one, and this is one that like I think more people fall under, the belief that one has a unique destiny. These destinies often involve power, fame, fortune, or again, supernatural concepts.
Born for more, born to be great.
Yes. Now, every piece of fiction written in the world, every piece of fantasy, every movie has a chosen one. Every Harry Potter is about like a chosen child coming to his own power and his own ability. We are basically taught by media and books and music that we are actually a chosen one, that we have a unique destiny, and that our destiny probably does involve power, fame, money, whatever. But the part where it becomes a delusion of grandeur it's where that steps up from being hopeful and secretly thinking of yourself, to you assuming it. And not only assuming it, but you stop doing things in life because of it.
On the hope thing, Joe, is a little bit of life to be hopeful and to have some fantasy good for you?
I believe so. I believe that being an optimist in part means being a little bit, hoping for things, wanting more, and believing that you have a good destiny. Maybe not a unique destiny, but a good one.
Because I feel for I'm getting those mean parents who tell their kids not to want or wish for anything because they're not good enough. Because that's common parent talk to their own kids.
Those are millennial parents. Those are the millennials who have lived through 3 economic crises. They're like, don't hope for anything. Don't want more. I'm with you on that one. I think that we may. I don't know how much parentage goes into delusions of grandeur. If you can parent a child into having delusions.
Oh, absolutely. Your kid does never the wrong. That wasn't my kid. My kid would never do that. I know those parents.
My kid is special. Yeah, right. And telling them you're special.
My friend who runs a clinic he's a baseball he played in the minor leagues in baseball, and that's all he's done. His whole life is play baseball. So he teaches kids now. He's in his 40s up in the Seattle area. He says every kid thinks that's not the kids. Their parents think they're the next number 1 pick in the NBL draft. And he said, you can't all be of my 500 students.
But all 500 are getting their gear ready.
Their parents think they are and spending the money. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the actual, not the diagnoses, but the disorders that come with delusions of grandeur?
The mental problems.
Yeah, because you and I, we can have delusions of grandeur no matter who we are, but there are certain disorders where if you have the disorder, there's a good chance you actually have delusions of grandeur. Now we said before, and we will keep saying it, it's important to separate between delusions and just simple hopes. But if you have the delusion with a capital D, there is a chance you have one of these disorders, and it may be diagnosed already with you. So I hope if you're listening and you have one of these disorders, this isn't like a shame on you. It is more like these are associated, and it's good for Todd and I to be aware that these can be connected. About 50% of people with schizophrenia have delusions of grandeur of some sort. About 2/3 of people with bipolar disorder experience delusions of grandeur. People with narcissistic personality disorder have a greatly inflated sense of their own importance.
Surprise.
Yeah.
No, that's a no duh, right?
If you hear people with true narcissism speak, you get to experience everything we have talked about with these delusions of grandeur in real time. They will tell you they're special. They will tell you they have amazing skills that you just haven't seen yet. And they will tell you that, they have a unique destiny, even if their test scores and money and, popularity, if you can show them actual numbers.
What I think is hilarious about this is called NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. Now, I know this is a serious thing. This is the kind of disease that you do not feel bad for the person.
No, you'll notice that when I got to narcissism, my tone changed. Like I started being more harsh.
Like this one's kind of a choice.
Yeah, it feels like it, or maybe it's not a choice. Maybe it's a genuine disorder, and I'm just sick of seeing it in television. Because narcissists, they are more likely to be CEOs. They show up more often in Hollywood, and narcissists sure seem to do well in politics. So I think that when we got to narcissism, maybe we both just I could see Todd and I deflated. We sighed so hard, both of our bodies turned into bellows, we just crushed down. People with dementia can have symptoms of delusions of grandeur, and of course, substance abuse. If you've ever seen somebody who is very drunk or has done any cocaine, they're going to tell you about their amazing ideas, how their destiny is going to be amazing, how they got all these things they're working on, irons in the fire, and then they sober up and you hear the truth. Now I'm going to quote, this is from Gooden Center, which is a site that has a Delusions of Grandeur, descriptions, links, help center. So you can check them out. Again, they're in our links. They say, quote, "People with delusions of grandeur can have serious issues in their personal and professional lives if their beliefs begin to interfere with reality. Their belief in their own superiority can lead to conflict and cause problems at work and in relationships. It can even put their lives in danger at times if they believe that they possess special powers or abilities such as being able to fly." So when we talk about delusions of grandeur, we mean sometimes real, actual physical delusions, like if I jump off this building, I can fly. Now, that's a clinical version of delusions of grandeur. We are kind of talking about today more colloquially, meaning Ray Parker Jr. didn't think he could play mean guitar without ever picking it up. He actually enjoyed playing it. He liked the process of it. And so he played until he was good. If he was delusional at all, it was the same kind of delusional that Hollywood starlets and scriptwriters working in coffee shops are.
Speaking of coffee shops, do you want to hear about Ray Parker Jr.'s coffee shop days?
I definitely do.
Ray Parker Jr., he absolutely idolized a certain musician. This guy's name was Grant Green. And Grant Green was a big hit musician, side guy, played for a bunch of groups, great songwriter, rhythm and blues guitarist, behind the scenes guy. So this was kind of how Ray Parker Jr. modeled his career. And throughout Ray Parker's story, and I don't know if you remember this from your research, do you notice what he was always doing?
What's that?
He was doing work. He was going and listening to other bands live.
Yeah, he was picking up all these tips and tricks, like he was, one would call it like professional research, like, or field research.
And he did it from when he was young. He was too young to get into a nightclub at one time, but he would go and stand outside. And at one club in Detroit one time, he was listening through the window to Jimi Hendrix. But a lot of his time he was spent following Grant Green. And Grant Green was a hero to the heroes. He was all the lead singers, all the big groups, all the bands knew how awesome he was. But Ray Parker knew how good he was because he was an accomplished musician himself, and this was someone that he looked up to.
Okay, was he a session player or something? Because I've never heard of Grant Green. It may just be my lack of culture.
Right, and mine too. And he didn't get famous until he's one of those Edgar Allan Poe. He wasn't famous until after he died. And it was so niche, it wasn't stuff that we would have heard on the radio.
Okay, but Ray had heard of him.
He did, and a big changing point of his life was he went to see his jazz idol scraping by towards the end of the career, living day to day, living off burgers for playing that night at the club. No home, no family, no retirement, no savings, living out of his car. So he goes to see him at a show. And then the next night, he goes and sees James Brown. And James Brown is less a serious musician, and he's just fun. He's just rock and roll.
Oh, that's got to be a blow.
So he looks at Grant Green's life, and he says, I can play like him. And then he thinks, well, anyone can play like James Brown. This is easy. So he takes a look at his jazz guitar, which is called it's a Gibson L5. And then he also has a rock guitar, which is a Gibson 335. So he makes a decision. Either I can be poor and penniless and good, or I can be a rock star rich. And guess which one he chooses?
Okay.
James Brown. He was going to be a rock star rich.
He chooses the glittery bedazzled half cape and the rock guitar. Would you ever make that choice? Like if you have delusions of, let's say delusions of mastery, because in my mind in this story, Grant Green kind of represents the master, whereas James Brown represents the rocker, like the personality and, giving the people what they want. Would you ever pick popularity and fame over technical mastery?
I think I would. I think that, and I want to talk about this later, so I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
But I think it's better to touch more people and have that one-hit wonder and make the whole world happy than to be this tortured genius that's appreciated by a few. What about you? You're a little bit more snobbish about the arts than me.
In recent years, I have started appreciating the ability to do both, sort of. I've started appreciating more the artists who can use simple building blocks that are accessible to everybody, but to use those to make a mosaic of mastery. So be a James Brown, but secretly have the underlying part of your work be brilliant, be an actual message.
On the musician thing, I always think of, I did some voice training with a opera singer. He did voice training for me to do voiceover work. And he was always frustrated with these bands that he knows are terrible singers, but they're millionaires and they're famous and they're on jets. And he's like, what the fuck? These guys suck.
Right.
You know, so I kind of feel for the real geniuses, but I think their fame is in their own circles.
Right. If you want to be a Grant Green, you're going to be famous among the professionals, but you're going to be, working for a burger. How much do jazz musicians make? Do you think you could live off their salary?
Well, you dug up some research on this. A jazz musician now makes about $50,000 a year, about $24 an hour.
Okay.
So that's more than school teachers.
That is more than school teachers. Yeah, that's really not that bad in this state. I think it's a livable wage.
Tough hours. A lot of travel. I don't know how long jazz musicians live off burgers and bourbon.
Right.
But not easy. You're always selling new gigs. I mean, it's one thing if you're one of the big time, but if you're one of the small time, you're probably getting on the phone every day. And in the olden days, probably getting on a payphone and calling the next club and seeing if you can book that night.
Being canceled, having other musicians come to town and take your place. Yeah.
Getting fired by your band, right?
Yeah.
Getting a fight, just getting sick of each other after playing out every night.
I guess it's like the manager, the be a manager question. Like, you may be able to live off the wage, but can you handle that kind of a lifestyle and stress? So that makes sense.
How conducive that is to a wife or a husband, to have a traveling wife or a traveling husband.
Right.
Forever. Not just like going away for 6 months, but this is who you married. Come see me tonight if you want to see me.
Right.
$20 cover.
It also makes me think of, okay, so Grant Green did what a lot of musicians are, let's say, at risk to become, which is they get very, very good. They become basically a master of their field just because simply they put in the hours, they put in the time. They become masters. But then there isn't really there isn't the drive or there isn't the luck to become a huge wonder hit. And so they become just very talented in their field, but they don't actually become like center stage, big, pop musician, no one hit wonder, no big payout. So I wonder if that's something that Ray Parker Jr. was afraid of, because that's what Delusions of Grandeur is based on. We don't have delusions of mastery. We have delusions of grandeur. We don't want to be a Grant Green if we have that delusion. We want to be Katy Perry.
That's a good point.
So to get back to Green just for a second, how did the lifestyle of burgers and bourbon treat Green?
Grant Green, this caught up with him. So this shows kind of Ray Parker Jr.'s Detroit street smarts. He looked at the whole picture and he mastered both. He was a master of his thing, respected by all the musicians, and then he became a performer. So he kind of did the best of both. He did Grant Green and he did James Brown.
Okay.
Both on a smaller scale. But Grant Green, his hero, a lot of his music, Joe, wasn't even released till after he had passed, and he died very young. He was out traveling, and he spent about a good year in the hospital, in and out of the hospital, and he was only 42 years old. But
42.
He'd been a road warrior for years, and they begged him to stay. So he spent about a year in and out of the hospital, and this was in 1978, so this was the end of the 70s. And his doctor's advice, They said stay in the hospital, stay home, stay in bed, get better, recharge your batteries, and go back out there. But against the advice of the doctors, he went out and he was playing a big hit musician, George Benson, who I really like. He was playing at his Breezing Lounge. And that night, it was January 31st, 1979, he died of a heart attack at only 43 years old.
That is crazy.
He left 6 children, and he was in absolute poverty.
Wow. So if you are Ray Parker Jr., you watch this master not hit that stardom mark, not hit that grandeur mark, and then die that young doing what you love.
Not seeing his kids growing up, not seeing his grandchildren.
Okay. So that could be a warning for anybody who has delusions of grandeur or just is trying to make it that big, that you can get stuck on that level. Would you mind if we discuss mastery itself? Like if we have the practice or the discipline, if we're willing to do the process.
Yes, and I think you're going to go into my Malcolm Gladwell. I know for a fact you're more likely to work yourself to death than I am to work myself to death.
Okay, that might be true.
So I want you to pay attention to. So tell me about this. How do we get mastery? Is it the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours?
We are going to disabuse the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours. Okay, when Gladwell quoted that, Gladwell and Robert Greene both quoted that if you practice, say, jazz guitar for 10,000 hours, that is about how long it takes to master something. They also followed musicians and chess players, and they both of them have published studies about this. Now, why does mastery fit into delusions of grandeur? And why do we want to hit that 10,000 hours if that is, in fact, how long it takes to master a skill? Because really, greatness for the sake of greatness is the delusion in Delusions of Grandeur. If you enjoy something, you are more likely to master it because you're more likely to hit those hours. If you enjoy something and you master it, mastery plus recognition really is greatness. Like your complete and total dominance of a skill, and then other people seeing that and being able to tap their toe to whatever you're playing or enjoy whatever you are writing, or if they see you acting on a stage and they love it and it emotionally pulls them, then that is greatness. That it doesn't matter how much money you make. You've passed delusions of grandeur. You've gotten into just grandeur. You've gotten great.
Well, we've seen this too on a smaller level, right? With Toastmasters.
Yes.
Isn't there some strength in just awareness?
I think so.
Aware of where you are so you can really measure what you need to do to get there.
Knowing where you are as far as like on your way to mastery. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, let's take what I said about Toastmasters. Let's say Joe's story. He went, he had a book deal almost locked up, but he didn't have the social skills to close the deal, right?
Right.
So I'll let you tell the story.
Sure. I won't say which guild it was, but my first introduction to writing for fiction contests, I got an award and I showed up to the gala. It was an annual gala. And really all I had to do was go around, introduce myself to editors and tell them how I had written what I did and tell them about it. And I had never been to anything like that. It was my first time submitting something for really any publication. And it was a bigger award than I thought it was. And I flubbed everything possible. I didn't make the right connections. When people asked me what I did, I gave them platitudes and jokes. I didn't actually endorse myself. And at the end of the night, I collected 0 phone numbers. So I ended up going to Toastmasters. And I knew how far away from mastery I was.
But you got better fast.
I did.
And the only reason you got better fast was because you realized how far you're away. You felt the pain of what happened and the loss. And you said, well, I need to give myself, I don't just need a Band-Aid on this. I need surgery. So you joined multiple clubs. You became an officer. You did events. You competed in evaluations and speech contests. And for sake, you got good.
Yeah, I tried to put in as many hours as possible, and I as an officer, I was touring around the county, going club to club, giving guest speeches, and it really paid off.
And it was really uncomfortable, right?
Oh, so uncomfortable.
Because you're still working full time and
Yes.
and writing full time. It wasn't easy.
No. But it did not take 10,000 hours. I am not a master by any stretch, but it made me more aware of what I was doing, and it made me more able to communicate later when in writing, what I'm working on. I can go up to somebody now and tell them, hey, here's the story I'm working on. Here's my elevator pitch. Here are the characters and what they want. And I can actually get somebody on my side for a story. But that's not just limited to writing, of course. That's everything. If you can identify where you are on your particular ladder, acting, creative work, boxing, sports, whatever, it does not necessarily take 10,000 hours to become a master, and just your awareness of where you are can save you from it being a delusion of grandeur. Just you knowing, even if you're at the top, knowing where you are at the top can still mean you are not being delusional, that it is a realistic outlook. So what Todd mentioned, one of the things that makes mastery happen, and we'll link back to our article. We're actually going to be linking to an article called The Great Practice Myth Debunking of the 10,000 Hour Rule. And in this article, they talk about how you don't necessarily get the benefits from just mechanical repetition. If Ray Parker Jr. sits down and just plays the same couple of songs over and over and over again just to kill time, he does not become better. What does make someone get better is adjusting your execution over and over again to get closer to your goals. Sometimes deliberate practice by being guided by an expert or a coach, somebody with an expert eye. Seeking mentors. We have episodes of this podcast about seeking mentors to get better. And again, I'm gonna call back to Grit by Angela Duckworth. Doing deliberate practice, in quotes, underlined, capitalized. Doing something that isn't just practice because you are repeating an activity that you are trying to get better at, but practice in a way where you are making yourself uncomfortable and stretching, working hard in a way that it is finding out what you don't know in what you're doing. That deliberate practice, it hurts. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't give you flow state. It is more intense and it is more exhausting mentally and physically. But that is how you get to mastery without wasting 10,000 hours. In fact, in this specific article, they talk about some chess players who are naturally predisposed to playing chess, and they do deliberate practice more often than their peers. Some of them have reached mastery in under 3 years. That is a far cry from 10,000 hours.
Absolutely. And we know that from our creative project, from your writing, from our show. It's uncomfortable. We squirm.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when we get stuff that's out of our wheelhouse or new research and new word track. It's uncomfortable. It's always worth it, though.
It very much is. If you are doing something for greatness, if you are working on an ability or skill, or if you are driving towards something bigger, if you feel like you might have a delusion of grandeur, here's a real simple question. Do you feel comfortable when you are practicing that skill? If your answer is yes, you feel completely comfortable, then it's a delusion. Move on. Find someone to help you, find a mentor, find a way to continue raising the bar on your skill. Otherwise, you are just practicing guitar, the same few songs in your apartment over and over. And We can make this into sort of like a code. Let's turn this into a rule. If you're not seeking mentors, practicing regularly, and trying to poke holes in your own skills, it could be delusional
And uncomfortable.
It's
supposed to hurt a little bit.
Yeah. If you've met someone who has delusions of grandeur, when you and I have gone to Toastmasters, when we meet somebody who doesn't like feedback and gets angry at being corrected, they just want recognition for their genius. That's how we spot someone who has delusions of grandeur. If they shake their head after getting good feedback and they're just like, no, you just don't understand my genius.
Or I see what a lot of people say, well, I'm just a natural. It just came easy to me.
Yeah.
And that always makes me kind of scratch my head.
If you suspect that you actually have greatness in you, as in one specific thing, how do you budget for it? Because if somebody is moving to Hollywood and throwing it all in, and that's the romantic drama, like that's like the soap opera version of having a talent, is you go all in, you sell your house, you get rid of all your things, you move to whatever coast or city is going to support your talent. How do you do it realistically if you're trying to work your talent up like Ray Parker?
Well, what if you think that you're the next One Direction band, and you think that you're going to go all in? You're going to buy a whole studio. You're going to rent a whole studio. You're going to
pay a producer that charges way too much.
Right. Get a producer from L.A. or New York or London.
Right.
And then promote. You're going to spend, every cent you have on digital marketing.
Right. Or you do a Ray Parker and you live in the city. Like he didn't go anywhere. He started in Detroit. He ended in Detroit. And he practiced on a budget. He chose between two guitars. He saw the local artists. He didn't go crazy. I want you to tell me if this sounds nuts or not. I want you to tell me if this is like me being too practical, like dad practical.
Well, Joe's a cheapskate, so
I am a cheapskate.
Let me premise it with that.
Yes. We have a whole frugality episode exposing my cheapness. I say that if you have a talent, you're developing it, and you think you're going to be great, I think you should spend like it's your entertainment budget, not like it's your education.
Oh, I like that.
How much are you willing to spend on a TV or a entertainment set in a year?
Well, if it's $1,000, $1,000 for your Hulu or your cable or whatever. But I think when people start writing checks for things to substitute for what?
Talent.
Yeah, to think that they think that's going to be a shortcut. You think if you hire the best coach, the $500 an hour coach, which you really aren't to the level that you can even use there, what they can teach you.
Right.
You need the $10 an hour. You need the free coach. You're still at the YMCA, but you're thinking, well, if I get a better studio, I'll sound better. And if I get the most expensive producer, I'll sound better. As opposed to developing your voice, playing your instrument more.
Right. They're buying a talent booster instead of going after mastery. I like the idea of spending the same amount that you would spend on your entertainment budget, giving a couple thousand. If you would spend that time that you are practicing, so I put in 1,000 hours into a video game I've been playing. If I also am willing to put in 1,000 hours into writing, I will spend the same amount that I would spend on a computer and a video game and a mouse and whatever gear went into that entertainment. I'm willing to spend the same amount or meet it. But I think what people do is they say, this will pay off eventually. If I spend a crazy amount for a producer now, but when I'm a one-hit wonder, all that money will come back. Like I'll pull the arm on that casino machine and it'll come back to me.
Yeah, you start Googling what the income is of certain professions that you're not even
right.
that you have zero training. Have you ever done that? It's like, I'm going to make this much when you haven't done any of the work that those people have done.
Right, you're a tenth of the way to mastery, and you're already looking at ZipRecruiter thinking, what if I have that talent? I had a boss that came to me. Can I tell you a short story about writing?
Oh, please, I love your stories.
I was working I pick jobs that let me write. that let me sort of get report writing and technical work out of the way. And then the rest of the night for me is creative writing. I had a boss who came to me and he told me that I had inspired him, and he's like, it's happening. I'm taking a year off from work. I'm going to write my book, and it's going to be published, and I'll make all my money back. And I didn't laugh. I really want to be supportive, but I did tell him that is a recipe for like making sure you never actually finish what you're trying to do. Like if you give yourself a time limit, that's fine. Like that's a goal set, but limiting how much time you have to develop a talent and limiting a time set for when that talent can pay back to pay itself off, that's madness to me. I know that's traditional, but it sounds crazy.
Are you flattered that you had that kind of impact on your boss?
I am flattered that he thought of me when he thought about taking that kind of a risk, and that it was a creative field I was interested in.
Creative dreams do come true. There are those books that sell millions of copies. The first, it doesn't happen very often. You're more likely to win the lottery, but Ray Parker Jr. almost won the lottery more than once.
That is true. He is one of sort of our. He's going to continue to be at least my example for somebody who is able to put in that work and get it to pay back. Like it when we talk about budgeting for entertainment, not for career, this became his career pretty quickly.
Well, he got his big break in 1976. He was asked by a producer to co-write and record a song called "You Make Me Feel Like Dancing." And they were going to cut the song with Leo Sawyer, who is kind of a disco, really high-pitched voice. I don't know if you've heard his song. I'm going to play for you, though.
Yeah, please.
It was a monster hit. And what the producer said was, hey, if you cut the song with Leo, I'll give you part of the song. The only problem was, when the song got released, Ray Parker Jr.'s name was left off of it. In 1977, a year later, it went to number one.
Oh.
And two other people, Sawyer and a guy named Vinny Poncia, were credited as the songwriters. So he's at home. It wins a Grammy. He's sitting with his mother in his house. He hasn't done anything for his mom. His goal as a young boy and as a man was to buy a house for his mom. That was his value. That was his way of showing he was successful. That was his way of giving back to Detroit and his family. He said it was one of the lowest points of his life. He had to hear that song on the radio all the time. Can you see how heart-wrenching that would be?
That is the part that would kill me. Every other part, like watching it rise on the billboards, seeing the numbers go up, that would all be like, I would feel pride.
Well,
but when
suicide
I had to
stuff,
hear it
right?
all the time.
That's suicide, or I'm going to kill him, or I don't know what you do. All my emotions are going through me right now.
Yeah, that would be maddening. Walking past other people's radios and hearing them rock out to it, I would clench my heart. That would hurt.
It did hurt. But Ray Parker Jr. had a different spin on it. Even though he didn't get the Grammy, even though he didn't get the money, he got the attention of Clive Davis. Now, if you don't know who Clive Davis is, he's a guy who's signed and taken artists from nothing to the top. Artists like the band Chicago, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, Aerosmith, Pink Floyd. He's also known for bringing Whitney Houston all the way to the top. So he didn't get the hit song, but he got Clive Davis' attention, and he signed Ray Parker Jr.
Okay. I love that. I thought this was just all negative. Like when we were putting this narrative together, I thought this would just be a shot in the foot, but that's actually kind of nice.
He had a funny quote about it. He goes, I'm a glass half full kind of guy because I had to be at the time. I couldn't get any emptier.
His glass is full of Clive Davis at this moment.
I have noticed a thing too, Joe, and I just want to just bounce this off you and see what you think. It seems like a lot of time when there's people who have just mainstream success, the one that pops in mind is Jimmy Buffett. He He whines about in all his interviews about he's made about $500 million for his kind of niche music. He says, I've never won an award for any of my won an award for any of my music. Like it's this huge tragedy.
Right.
Do you think the two balance out? If you're this one-hit wonder and make all this money, should that suffice for an award?
I have a lot of strange opinions about this. I think that if you become known for something that isn't, let's say super respectable, but you have the money, then that gives you license to do other things later. I think that if you never have a creative sundown, like as long as you don't stop, then you've won. Like okay, so for Jimmy Buffett, as long as he never stopped making music, as long as he didn't stop trying to create things that would be mainstream successful, if he never, put the pen down, I think that's a success because he has the money. So why not?
Yeah, it's a sign of overappreciated.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The comically, the writer of Goosebumps, R.L. Stine, he has a masterclass and he talks about how funny it is that people disrespect this children's horror book series that he invented. And he's got so much money from it, and he knows it's a joke. Like he kind of cracks up about it himself. He knows that it's not going to be ever, it's not creatively respected. People don't think he's a genius. He wrote these schlocky, werewolf tales for preteens, but he still treats it with humor. Like he doesn't feel upset about it. He does the opposite of Jimmy Buffett. Instead of whining that he never got, mainstream success or an award or something, he's like, yeah, but I made my money off of doing the thing I love. So what's wrong with that?
That's exactly how Ray Parker Jr. is about Ghostbusters.
That is heartwarming. I like that so much.
He doesn't take it he doesn't try to defend it to the end.
In case we've gotten this far in the episode, and this is going to be a long episode, I apologize to anyone who's listening for the end of this. In case we have gotten this far without really making it clear what breaks you, what sets you apart from a true delusion of grandeur, I just want to introduce you really quickly to something called process thinking. We got this from one of our backstage writers. You and I have both talked about process thinking, but one of our process writers, Adam, threw this one at me, and it's a coach named Nick Saban. Now, if you're into football...
Nick Saban.
Thank you.
I apologize. Anytime Joe starts talking about sports... I cringe. Talk about being uncomfortable creatively.
Right. Oh no, I'm glad you're here to correct me on these things. I would rather you correct me and make me feel a little slower on this.
You might actually be right with that. He's a down south kind of. That might be the correct pronunciation. He just mispronounces his name. He is a football coach, for God's sakes.
Yeah. If you're in football, you're allowed to pronounce your name any way you want. But he talks about the process. He talks about how he doesn't focus on... Now, this isn't just from him. Like, he didn't come up with this folksy style of teaching and award-winning coaching. He actually kind of paired up with LSU and the Miami Dolphins, and then later the University of Alabama. And he works on the process, and it is sort of like collided with a bunch of other, let's say, psychological or proven psychological theories about how mastery works. The idea is that you never focus on what the big picture is. You don't necessarily envision the end goal, the ribbon at the end of the race. You don't necessarily envision all the money you're going to get from becoming a big-time musician. Instead, do what Nick does. You envision what the next play is. Saban and a psychiatric professor, Lionel Rosen, they sat down to sort of break down what a football game plays out to be, like what it actually is. As far as like work and what are the moments that make the most difference. And really, when they broke it down to manageable pieces, Rosen emphasized that the average football play is only about 7 seconds. So if a coach just focuses on that little snapshot coming up, that 7 seconds, it makes it a lot easier to compartmentalize. You can conceptualize what's about to happen.
Isn't that great success process? It makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Joe, I can do anything perfect for 7 seconds.
Right.
Well, and we all can.
It's a very stoic way to look at things. In fact, Nick Saban's process was featured in The Obstacle is the Way, the Ryan Holiday Stoicism book that we've talked about on the show. So if you ever think you might have delusions of grandeur and you are wondering, will I ever achieve mastery? Is this a delusion of mine? Just focus on the next 7 seconds. Focus on the process itself. That will save you from it being a delusion. If you're in public speaking, focus on the next speech. If you are in writing, focus on the next sentence or paragraph. Whatever your creative field is, if you just focus on the next snapshot or moment, that will save you from it being a delusion. That will just be you putting in good process practice and put in that focus.
And most Division I head coaches never win. 99% of them never win one national championship. Never win one. Nick Saban, doing the 7-second approach, has won 7 national titles.
That is so wild, but it's good to know that this has that much of a backbone in it. So we mentioned that this episode came from us sharing a documentary. Todd and I trade documentaries whenever we want to show off our tastes. No, I'm kidding. It's more of we can't stop talking about what we get interested in and what subjects drag us through the woods. So could you talk to us about how we found out about Ray Parker and where Ray's journey eventually led him?
Yeah, Ray Parker Jr., this Hired Guns documentary on Amazon is phenomenal. Everybody in the world loves food and music. There's nobody you're ever going to find doesn't love music. And this will make you look at the industry a lot different. And how a lot of our heroes in music, that song was all written for them. Every word, every syllable, every note.
I literally started flipping back through my old band catalogs, and I have like a program from Black Sabbath. I was skimming through it while watching the documentary because I was like, okay, this wasn't written by that. Like it kind of sent me spiraling, really.
You feel that way. Like this is about their girlfriend who left them and
right.
And it was so personal. No, this is a business. And that's kind of how Ray talks about it. They ask him about getting sued by Huey Lewis. Huey Lewis was a big band, and he said Ghostbusters was that same rhythm. And they asked Ray about it, and Ray, he just kind of blows it off and said, I was never sued by Huey Lewis. My record company was. I never went to court. It was all settled. It was all taken care of. I still have Ghostbusters. Doesn't say Huey Lewis on the song. So, which is a great point.
Yeah. And he finally got his name on something.
He did. He loves the fact that he's a one-hit wonder. He says his song, it made people smile. How could you hate, and this is his quote exactly, having a winning lottery ticket? It makes him a hero to his sons. And this is the one that cracked me up. His children snicker today when they hear about what a sex symbol their dad used to be. They look at each other like they just don't get it.
Can we be cheesy and end this narrative with the phrase that everybody is going to want to hear?
Oh, go ahead.
Who are you going to call?
Who are you going to call?
Ghostbusters.
If you suspect you have true delusions of grandeur, you should seek professional diagnosis. Believing you're a genius or you're the greatest in your field despite having evidence to the contrary. These can be signs of underlying mental illness. However, if you're just overwhelmingly confident, we have a few guidelines to offer to keep your engine of greatness from dragging the rest of your life off the tracks. When pursuing greatness, try not to base your budget around what you'll earn if you make it. Don't blow your savings on expensive coaching, world-class equipment, or elite classes. Instead, Treat aspirations that haven't started paying for themselves yet as entertainment, nothing more, and budget accordingly. Plan to funnel your mastery hours into something you genuinely love. If you can't follow the process for 10 years, practicing the pure joy of practicing, then you might want to move on. When it comes to being great, nobody wants to pat you on the back for just being a genius. They want to pat you on the back for making their toe tap to an amazing beat. They want to pat you on the back for making them cry over a beautiful poem, for inspiring them, for leading them, for giving them some winning advice. Want to know if you have greatness in you, or if it's all just delusional? The delusional person focuses on themselves. They're the only one who benefits from their so-called greatness. Whereas truly great people focus on the skill. Whatever it is, they're busy honing it every day. And while the process of daily practice might be inherently selfish, it's everyone around them who eventually benefit from the grandeur of what they can do. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debates.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.